Hi, and welcome to the Mystic Chat, episode 6, Nordic Witchcraft. So I'm excited about this show. I know I've been hearing a whole lot of people saying they're excited to see the show, and it looks like we have a great group today. My name is Chris Allen. And I am a minister with the Fellowship of the Phoenix. I am a published author, and I teach via Zoom all the time now with everything going on. So with that, I will like to introduce Amy. Amy, give
Hello.
an introduction.
Hello, I'm Amy Alice, but I'm better known as Ruby Ruse. I am a YouTube artist. I talk about the Fae and occult magic and some travel and performance on my channel, and that's Fairy Fortunes on YouTube. So I hope you'll go and check me out over there.
Awesome. And then, of course, we have Luke. Luke, say
Hey,
it about yourself.
yeah, you bet. Hey, everybody. I'm Luke Babb. I am a columnist at The Wild Hunt, member of both the Fellowship of the Phoenix and the Troth, which is an American heathen group. I consider myself a devotional polytheist. So that means I work with a lot of different spirits, primarily the Norse and Hellenic pantheons. And I'm sure that we will talk more about what I do today.
Awesome. Well, why don't you go ahead and take it away and just start? And
Oh, sure. So back in episode 3, I think, we had a sort of Norse mysteries intro, which sort of did a very high level look at the mythos and the world of Norse mythology, briefly touched on magic, and then went into some of the like politics and history of what Norse practitioners in America have been like and what that looks like. That's available through our YouTube channel if you're interested in that sort of stuff. But afterwards, when we were answering questions, we got a lot of questions about going more into depth about the magic, specifically going more into depth about some of the myths of like Norse work and what it means to be sort of a Norse practitioner in America today. So this is round 2. And I think that there is so much under the heading of what it means to be somebody who works with the Norse pantheon, and that can mean that you are a witch, that can mean that you are a heathen, that can mean that you are a druid. There are many different people who sort of like fit under this umbrella, and a lot to talk about. And so I really wanted to I'm really excited to get the chance to like dive more into that, I think.
I do have a question for you, Luke. I also work with the Hellenic and Nordic pantheons.
Mm-hmm.
I work with primarily Diana and Persephone, and Thor and Odin are frequent visitors in my household. They just hang out. And I know a lot about Scandinavian mythology because that is a part of my cultural heritage. But I kind of got turned off of classifying myself as a heathen because it was my understanding that you really had to focus entirely on the Nordic pantheon and kind of give up your Hellenic trends. But you describe yourself as working with both Hellenic and Nordic. So can you kind of talk about where did that, it seems like that's kind of a myth in that it's a falsehood that you have to work only with the Nordic pantheon to be classified as a heathen. Can you elaborate on that or tell me if I'm wrong?
So what I am going to say to start off with is that for the duration of this hour, I am speaking entirely from my own experience and about my own practice. right? Even when I start talking about like the community, I'm really only just talking about like the community as I interact with it and how I move through it and the people who I consider myself in community with. That said, disclaimer out of the way. It really depends on who you talk to. Because there are so many people who identify with heathenry in many different ways, there is definitely a strand of people in the community who are very much like, I am a heathen because I do heathen things and only heathen things and work with heathen gods and only heathen gods. I'm not one of those people. Is the really simple answer, which is one of the reasons I talk more about like being a polytheist sometimes. I definitely identify as a heathen. The cosmology and the worldview are very integral to my practice. Um, and the way I interact with the deities means that like it's it's like running Firefox and Internet Explorer at the same time. They're technically they do the same sort of thing, but they're very different. And if you try to run one of them the same way as the other, things are going to get messed up. My experience of the Hellenic gods is that they are very much they taste different. They expect different things. They act in different ways, and they have very different expectations of you um, than the Norse gods do. So for me, being heathen means that I am heathen, and also on another track on the album, um, I'm doing something different. Um, a lot of my thoughts about that kind of were formed because I interacted with ADF really early. And ADF is really good about being able to say like, and especially, I'm going to shout out to Wild Onion Grove, not just because part of it's here. But Wild Onion Grove is the really lovely group here in Chicago that cycles through the year while doing rituals to different deities from different pantheons. So some ADF groves are very focused, like this is a heathen grove, we do heathen things. All of our rites are going to be for heathens. Wild Onion was the first place that I was like, so we're going to do Athena Midsummer, and then we're going to move straight into Freya for like fall, and then we're going to have the Morrigan come in for Samhain. And we're going to do these in very different ways because they're different people. And my understanding of the gods is very much in terms of like, this is a person who likes these things.
Yes.
So it doesn't at all surprise me. It does the opposite of surprise me, that if you are like talking to spirits a lot, Odin shows up at your door and just won't leave. That's actually canon. Like that's in the book.
You know, I think it's so interesting because you know, with all my research about um, witchcraft and stuff, what witchcraft is, especially from the 15th, 16th, 17th, and even 18th centuries, um, they weren't all about like, oh, it has to. I'm in England, and all it has to be Welsh or Celtic. Oh, I live in France. It has to be France. In my research, the witches then they weren't purists at all, and I don't remember if I've done so many of these Zoom things. I don't remember if it's with this show or a different one. I was talking about how when a lot of witches became witches at that time for survival, it wasn't necessarily about, oh, I want to honor a god. It wasn't about that. It was, and they also traded with each other. So if you get a magical person or a wise woman or whoever, and they said, hey, let me show you how to do magic to find lost treasure, they didn't care if it came from Egypt, or if it came from the Norse, or it came from Ireland, as long as it got the job done, because I had paying clients who were going to do that. And so there was a whole lot of not cross referencing, like cross. What am I? What word am I using for like cross?
Cross-pollination, yeah.
Cross-pollination. Sounds
Mhm.
sexual, but
And my research of the Vikings, just from genealogy research and that kind of thing, people have this idea of them being these barbaric people, and that's actually not true. They were into mathematics. They were into, of course, navigation. And they're finding that they adopted a lot of the looks and practices of the cultures that they visited. So they were wearing silk gowns, and they were wearing makeup, and they had tattoos and different things from different cultures that they had interacted with.
Mm-hmm.
It's refreshing to hear you talk, Luke, about how you're embracing different things and
I think,
still call yourself a heathen.
yeah, I think that anybody who tries to talk about a pure heathen experience as something that has ever happened in the past is being generously ahistoric, and quite possibly a racist. So like,
well,
I do not think that there is any evidence from any point in time ever of a culture that, like, and this is the sort of shit that I would like dock my students for in early papers, right? Like, throughout history, men and women across the world, nobody has ever been isolationist enough that they only work and only have the culture that they are like brought up in. Like, even if you live in a tiny town, there people come through town. Like, things travel through, ideas travel, and there is no reason besides, you know what, I'm not sure that that's true, but I would argue that, as Kanla is saying in the chat, that that's how culture happens, that's what culture is. It's interaction, and I can't think of any examples of isolationism that doesn't come from fear or that lasts for any length of time.
well, no, because again, you have to remember that it was, these cultures, it was about survival, and maybe it was the survival of the spirit and your spirituality, but whatever it is, it was about going forth, about getting better. And so I agree with you 100% about how we borrow from different cultures, and um
I think, can I, before we move on, I think that there is a worthwhile caveat here, that going out and experiencing the world and learning about new people, and like trying to understand them, is very different than colonialism, and is very different than appropriation, both of which we've talked about on the show before. And I also want to actually like give a nod to the fact. So when I was in Disney World as a kid, right? In Epcot, there used to be a Norse ride, right? That was about the Vikings and trolls, mostly about trolls.
Yeah.
Odin makes an appearance because Odin always makes an appearance. This is just how Odin is. But in the line, as you're waiting to get into the ride, they used to have this map that was a history of Viking exploration. And I, at the time, looked at the person in line with me and said, they explored the hell out of some of those abbeys. There's trade, there's exploration, there's all of that, but there is also like a history of violence, and like interacting with people in terms of like taking their things and their people. Like this is not, I'm not trying to paint some golden age of like pure happiness and light. But
Right.
They were an aggressive people.
well, you kind of had to be at that point, but again, who isn't?
Yeah. You mentioned the worldview earlier, and I want to hear more about that. Like, tell me what is appealing about this worldview and how do you use it in your practice?
What a weird question. I mean,
Oh, no.
it's a great question. It's a wonderful question. But it's a weird one to try to answer. Because part of it isn't about sense making. Like I'm trying to be like, here are the things that make sense to me about this. And there are some of those, right? Like heathenry has a real focus on community and hospitality that I find echoes a lot with me. But part of it is really just about feeling at home. Like these spirits feel like people I want to hang out with and learn from. When I interact with them, I get better at doing my thing. And they work in ways that I don't necessarily like, but do understand. And that's that, like for me, the heathen pantheon is actually much more easy to approach than the Greek. I have to do a lot more work with the Hellenics. And I have to like make choices to build relationship with each of the Hellenics.
You know, I have a theory about that,
Yeah.
why, because I work with Diana and Escalapius, but at the same time, I work with the Freyr and Hela and Freya and in the whole 9 yards. I have a theory. So my theory is that the reason it feels so, at least for myself, so easy and at home to work, especially with the veneer, is because they're land-based and we're on the land, and that's how we survive. That's how we live. It's earth-based, and so it's a very, at least for myself, it's a very tangible energy. For the Greco-Roman, for gods, are a little bit, well, not all of them, but some of them are a little bit more upper world and a little bit more esoteric, meaning like abstract energy versus, you know, like for example, when I walk outside, especially on a late spring afternoon, I'm like, I feel Freya, I feel Freyr, I feel them in the air, the flowers, I feel them. Whereas if I'm going to connect with Apollo or Diana, I'm like, okay, the moon, the sun. Okay, let me connect. I have to look for it. I have to search for it. I'm not saying that's bad or wrong or incorrect. I'm just saying it's just, at least for me, that's my theory about why, like in shamanism, and when I do a Native American ceremony, I don't have to think about connecting because I'm already on the earth. I'm already here. So that's my theory about that.
I love that. I also think that it's like, for me, a lot of this is very personal, and it's very much about like how we think of and interact with these spirits or energies, right? And I think that is really an exciting thing for the community too, is like building in space that like however you're interacting with spirits is fine, and you can get better at it, but like there's like at a certain point, like if the opposite was happening, and if I was like, listen, I can call Hermes at any point in the day and just be like, bro, and he'd be like, bro, which is also kind of true. Like that's not wrong either. Our friend Conla Freyason does some really great writing about like building in an ability to like have your experience and be excited about your experience and not hold it to other people's experiences necessarily, and like create your own path, especially within Norse stuff, which has been a really great sort of through line in writing for me to be able to follow, in terms of like, yeah, I don't necessarily connect with this ritual that is supposedly like the heathen ritual that we're supposed to do, but I can reach out to these spirits in my own ways. And that can still be like beautiful and affirming and good.
See, and that leads me into the actual Nordic witchcraft part of it too, because this is me trying to keep us on topics. So, because we have a tendency, because I'm a Gemini, to go.
You're doing great.
I'm trying, but anyway, so for myself, because and again, when I first started to like research heathenism and stuff, and up how I even got into it, like, yes, I'm half German, blah blah blah, but the stories and the mythologies that really resonated with me, and I love how the mythology has some of them have a silly quality to it, like you know. Thor, I just see Thor with the earth serpent, the sea serpent, with the fishing pole, and I just think all that it really resonated with me. And of course, hello, and fair and all that. But anyway, so when I started to research the actual ceremony of it, the actual ritual of it, you had a symbol of blood, and you had things that people created, and that was it. And it felt very, I didn't say dry, but dry. It didn't fill my heart with magic. It just didn't. And so and when I was doing, the witchcraft of it, and I would call to the elves and call to Hela and Forholda and those spirits, and just do whatever. Meaning, yeah, I would take some of the ceremony like a symbol, whatever, but I would do it in the forest under a full moon, and I would draw the runes and do my say there and do my stuff, and then whatever happened, and there was no ceremony. I just basically did what my spirit told me to do, and that was it. And I really like that. So I kind of created all of my witchcraft to be like that, because I was already doing a Welsh kind of Anglo-Saxon, and sometimes in Anglo-Saxon stuff, Odin has a tendency to show up, just like you were saying. He'll show up in something and like that, and so it was already kind of there, but I was like, no, I want it to be really more Nordic. And so and to be honest, I would go back thinking, well, maybe I should be more authentic, because this is 20 years ago and I didn't know better. And so I was like, let me be more authentic and research more, and there wasn't a whole lot. So I was just like, I'm just going to keep doing this, because the gods show up and the ancestors show up, so it's all good, and that's why I started to do it.
And I think that, I mean, and like, here's the thing, right? Is that like, we're pagans. We've been around for a couple of minutes. Like, we've done our research. Ronald Hutton has happened. We all know that like a lot of the stuff that we're working with is fairly new. Like, we do the research, we do the reading, we dig up the bones, we look at the bones, we really think about the bones, and then like at the end of the day, we try to figure something out.
Right.
And even stuff that is like ensconced in tradition at this point is like, this is how you have a bloat and this is how you have a symbol, are people's best guess from 1970, earliest.
I think having like a modern guideline is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Because then if like you have a great experience where you are a part of all of these amazing pagan groups, so that you can then traverse to these different groups and have visiting bloats and symbols, and you are a part of that practice and you know what's going on and you can participate. So I think having some guidelines is really helpful because it streamlines everything.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a useful difference here between group space and private space,
Okay.
or like community space and space that you are building. Because like last year was the first time I went to a big Troth event. I went to Troth Moot, and the Troth, like I said, is a major American heathen community. And it was beautiful. It was the first big heathen group that I'd ever been a part of. They had a lot of traditions that I had not really like run into before, but were obviously like very much old traditions that they were using. And they were also like very conversant with like, okay, this is where it came from. We do it this way. It works really well. And it was really cool to be a part of that community and like be folded in so easily with like, all right, so at the end of bloat, we say this phrase, and it's a lovely phrase and it works really well. And like, that's how we do it. That's different from like, if I'm at home, or even if like I'm building my own ritual in a non-troth space, for other people, being like, what works best for me, what makes sense to me, what of this language can I use, but also what language is inherent to me in my relationship with the gods.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things, like for myself, I differentiate witchcraft from pagan spirituality because it's kind of like, and this is probably a bad example, but the left-hand path and the right-hand path. The right-hand path, as far as I understand and how I see it, is about community. Um, it's about what they call right action and healing and doing all those things and doing for others. So, for example, in my practice, when I'm a part of the fellowship, that's the right-hand path because I'm in service to someone else or the gods, the beings, stuff like that, devotion, healing. The left-hand path is for me and how I have that practice. It's about going within and doing the, doing the whole tantric idea of crossing personal boundaries ethically, and doing some of the like witchcraft, darker stuff like working with the dead, enlightenment for me and my benefit, not in a selfish way like I have all the power, but in a way of like, okay, this isn't about community per se, it's about my own spiritual development and challenging my fears and my shadows and working with those darker aspects, like for example Hela, because I know it's weird because I think we talked about this before. I was invited to attend a heathen group and they disinvited me because they found out I did magic and they were like, oh, that's too, no, we don't, heathens don't do magic. And I was just like, I don't understand, but sure, okay. And yeah,
What do they think talking to invisible people is?
well, I don't know. Because in my books I talk about the underworld and I talk about Hela, and I said, and I'm upfront, I don't care what people think. I was like, well, my gods are Freyr and Hela, and they're like, well, Freyr's okay, but just don't tell people Hela, they'll judge you. I'm like, gay Nordic witch. I don't think I care about what people think of me ever at all. But anyway, and so part of the practice for me is getting in touch with those things because I like facing the shadow. I like facing hard things. I like I say this and I ask the gods, don't
Please don't drop the hammer.
right. I like challenges. I like to get better through things that, and I don't want to say scary or whatever, but like things like death or facing the gods or the elves. Like, there's all these weird things about, oh, don't say this around the elves, don't say that. I was like, so I have a very tangible working relationship with the elves. So I go by their example and what my elvish teachers teach me to do versus some book saying, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't do this, whatever. I'm going to just do my own spiritual practice. And if people enjoy it, they do. If they don't, whatever, you know?
Ruby, what was your question?
Oh, here, I just wanted to ask Chris and you too, Luke, how would you define Nordic witchcraft? Like, what do you think sets it apart?
Well, for me, it's the Nordic cosmology and lore, but instead of it being community based, it's like for magical practice. When I mean magical practice, like self magical development in my witchcraft, there is a devotional aspect of it. You know, I do toast the gods and we do the hoozle and all that stuff, which is the blessing of the horn and all that. But it's for like, I hate to say darker magic because it makes people think we're sacrificing goats and we're not, which I'm not opposed to that, but I say that in jest. I would never actually hurt a goat ever. But anyway, because I'm gonna get a hate mail. But anyway, but it's for like to tap into the ancestors, to tap into the dragons, to tap in to the light and dark elves, and to have those relationships that empower your soul, empower your spirit, and empowers your magic. And the other thing I do that, oh my God, people act like it's the worst thing in the world, like the Norns. I work with the Norns constantly. Before I do a rune reading, I give offerings to the Norns. I talk to them. I work with them. I do fate magic. And I've had so many people like, you can't change fate. I'm like, that's what spells are.
Yeah.
That's what magic is. You're changing someone's fate by magic. Because I am a healer, a Reiki master teacher, by sending you healing, I'm changing your fate. I'm not going to say I have all the power to bring you from the brink of death, but if you do send healing, even prayers that help people, you're doing magic that changes someone's fate. So that's, to me, what Nordic witchcraft is. It's kind of like going against the status quo of you have to do it this way and you have to do it this way for good frith. And it's like, okay, I'm going to go in the shadows, talk to Hela, and do what she wants me to do, and that's my magic, you know? So that's what I see. Luke in the background laughing.
I'm just having a lot of thoughts, and I don't know if they're useful thoughts, but I think that something that might be useful here is to introduce the concept of weird, because this is one of the things that people look at between like the Hellenics and the Norse, and they're like, oh, it's the same. There's three ladies, they got a string, and then you die, and it's the fates. It's not wrong, but it's also not right, because there's this very specific set of words in the Norse cosmology about fate, right? And I don't disagree with you that you can change fate. But I think that means something really specific, because like the Norns are the ones that weave the web of fate, right? And think of that in like really like very straightforward, like shuttlecock sorts of ways, right? Like there are strands, you have a strand, everything that you have done up until this point has sort of like made your strand happen. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, my understanding of a very complicated and often contentious concept, right? Which I'm so glad that I managed to string that sentence together. Right, and like, again, because of one of the comments, and I think is really right, I think I'm going to start using the word weird instead of fate. Shout out to Chris Dork. So weird in Norse cosmology is very much about like, you've done a series of things up until this point in your life. That makes the next thing more likely to happen.
Correct.
Right?
That this is going to happen. This is likely to happen.
And it's, to a certain extent, it's pretty fixed. Like, the example that everybody gives is in the myths at some point, there is a fellow who is told, like, you're going to die in this very specific situation, right? But like, when that happens, how it happens, what it looks like when it happens, like, that's not necessarily set.
Right.
So I think that we can influence weird. I think that we can interact with weird. I don't know if we can change weird. But I think that like understanding weird and Urlong are pretty key to understanding how to do magic. Also, my UPG, my experience of the myths, my understanding of the myths, is that a lot of the conflict in the myths comes from people trying to mess up or change weird when they can't or shouldn't.
I actually
And
think it's an interesting concept, because you know, if you think about what witchcraft is, and I understand that witchcraft has come to mean now whatever your spiritual magical pagan practice, or non-pagan for some people, is. I get it, but you know, through history, what people thought as witchcraft is going against the flow of this of what people of order, I guess you should say. And one of my favorite things is, I think that we should shake up order, because that's how we have change. You know, we're going through the whole COVID thing, and that definitely shook up order. And by shaking up order, it makes us think, and it challenges us, it challenges people, because you know, the powers that be in leadership, they don't want anyone messing up the how things are, because we don't like the change. People don't like the change. It's like tricksters, and I know you love your tricksters. I know. Here we go.
I was about to say, is this just throwing Loki at me again? Yes, because I can do that. I can just do that.
No, I love it, because Loki, I think he is one of the most powerful, better of of, I didn't say better, I should say he has a very strong,
I mean, you could say
divine,
better. That'd be fine.
divine purpose. I just hear Thor in the back of my head going, really? But anyway, but I got thrown off. But anyway, it's Loki has a very specific purpose to shake up the order, because if he doesn't do that, things don't evolve, things don't change. And I think witchcraft, or just being an activist, for God's sake, it shakes up the order. And you know, that's witchcraft, that's bad, don't read tarot, don't read the runes, don't, you know, do all these things, because you're shaking up the order. Because nobody likes to, I shouldn't say that, a lot of people don't like to change. And as we all know here with this audience, is there's always this golden age of it was better in the past. And I read an article somewhere, and I don't remember who wrote it, about psychologically, that's mythology. Human beings have this whole thing about, they like to only see the good. Like, for example, you know, those people who are like, I had the best childhood ever. I'm like, I had some good points, but I also remember some really messed up points too. You know, that all of us are going to therapy for, to this day for. And then people for example, my older brother, after my father died, he was just like, oh my God, he was just a saint. He never did anything. He didn't raise his voice. It was like, okay, you and I had two very different experiences. My father was a great man. He taught us how to be spiritual. He taught us things, but he was a very human person, and to be honest, I honor him for his humanity. But because he idealized, he only saw the good things. It's the same thing with this whole golden age, the whole golden age. And so again, witchcraft shakes that up. So like, no, no, no. Let's spotlight all the things that are screwed up so we can change it and pray to the gods, or work with the Norns, or work with the weird and do our witchcraft and do these things and make change, you know. So that to me is what it's all about, you know.
Yeah. And I think that there's also so two things for me out of that. One, I think what you're referring to is John Michael Greer's World Full of Gods, which is a really, really good pagan theology book where he outlines the idea of like improvement as the major myth of the modern age. Like what we are today was better than what we used to be.
Right.
What we are going to be tomorrow is going to be better than that. Like there's this idea of both like we are improving and the past was perfect and we have to return to it and it was bad, and like it's a very messed up mythological cycle that ends up with us getting kind of stuck in this like reductivist understanding of how things should be without actually engaging with how they are. The other thing,
I think you need to say exactly what you said again. That was very cool. Say it again.
we get stuck in an idea of how things should be rather than actually looking at how they are.
I think that's powerful, and that's, I think, you know, when we face ourselves, our shadow, or our magic, that's what we have to do, is take a hard look at ourselves. And the witchcraft that I was taught and how I do my practice is sometimes you got to say, oh man, this is gonna suck. I'm gonna call Hela or call whoever and say, or call Loki and say, okay, show me what I need to work on. And it sucks and they hit you and it hurts and it's painful. But when you're working through it, you're like, actually, they're not wrong. I was kind of a blank, or I'm not doing blank, or I should be doing better, or whatever, you know?
And I've yet to get one of those lessons that don't end up with me being better at the end of it. Like they are painful and unpleasant and I don't like them at
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. But
Oh,
like I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't had them. The other thing, oh sorry, Amy, did you want to?
I just was going to reiterate another point, is that what I found, especially working with the Fae, is that everyone thinks that empathy and compassion are emotions, and they aren't, not according to the Fae. They are skills that we learn. And really, one of the only ways we learn that is going through those shadow processes, going through those painful things and embracing them and learning how to move through them. That is what develops the skill of empathy and compassion. Not to say that everything in our lives has to be horrible, but in order to have sympathy and compassion and empathy for someone that's going through something sorrowful, we have to have an understanding of what that might look like and feel like.
Yeah, I think that's actually a lesson that I've been getting recently, is that like having the experience really helps me understand other people's experiences.
well, absolutely, because I don't think we can. One of the things I teach to my healing students, and however, whenever we're working with the concept of death, you know, I can say you can have the exact same experience exactly, but you will never know what's happening, what's going through their mind. And so we have to go to a place, I say, for non-judgment, because you know, I see a whole lot of people all the time, and I go back and forth on this, who they don't have empathy, they don't have compassion. It happens to them, and then finally they have it.
Yeah.
And then you have some people who are enlightened and go, oh, I get it. That's why I had that horrible experience. And then you have people like, why me? I'm like, because you needed to learn the lesson.
Yeah. And I'm also, and here's the thing, right? Like, throughout all of this, you've been like working with the dead, super shadow worky, very scary stuff, like off in the left-hand path. And I'm like, okay, what makes that dark? What makes that not community?
This is
Uh,
why we're friends for that reason. You're like, I don't see the dark. I don't see it.
well, I mean, one, I don't see it. But two, like specifically, um, if you're talking about Norse witchcraft, right? You really you have three big witchy gods, and they are Freya,
Absolutely.
I would argue Loki, and Odin.
Yeah.
And I am struggling to think of a piece of magic that Odin does that does not involve talking to a dead person at some point. Um, like that's like calling up the dead to speak to and understand the future and like understand the past better and be more like, for him it's very much knowledge.
Well, see, that's the thing, and the thing is that I would hope that people understand is how we view the dead is completely drastically different of um, how heathens or any people from history view the dead, because we often, if we put our elderly and old folks home, and I get it, sometimes it's assisted like giving needs to happen because it's a lot of work. I get it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking when you put someone in an assisted living facility and you forget about them because, and like, for example, ageism. We're afraid to die. We're afraid to age. We're afraid of that. We're afraid of not being strong, whatever that means. And so, how we view the dead is like, oh, over there, shh, don't talk about it. They passed away. And we talk about this in the in our death midwife group. How we like to say, um, don't say they're dead. Well, they are dead. It's what it is. It's not disrespectful. It's not bad. It is what it is. I mean, I've talked to spirits and they're like, no, I'm pretty dead, and they, I mean, death was just so a part of their world, mothers died at childbirth all the time. Infants died, sons died, war, and I mean, it's death was just everywhere, and their food was death. And if
yeah
you think about it, and I'm one of those people, plants have spirits and plants are alive, and I work with plants all the time, so I don't see a difference between killing a plant and killing an animal. However, it needs to be done in a humane, respectful way for food and not for sport and things like that. Um, it was so how you survived was a, a, for death, and I think they had a huge respect for it and understanding that we don't have.
yeah and I think that that's really modern, and also I think, as John in the comments is pointing out, very American. I would point towards there's a YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician that
Ooh,
goes into that. She's everything she's ever done is amazing,
how
and
am
I
I going
highly
to hear
recommend it.
about this?
Right. She's great, highly recommended, but she goes into some of the like, here is when we started not seeing dead bodies.
Hmm.
Here's how that changed things about how we understand them.
Well, I do know
Um,
part of it was is because during times of disease, you wanted to get the bodies away from people just so they wouldn't catch the disease. So I do understand that. It makes sense. However, one of the things I've learned since becoming a death midwife is, did you know embalming is not a practice you have to do?
yep.
And the only purpose embalming has is to keep the body fresher for viewing. That being said, this is kind of where it's gross. So embalming fluid is extremely toxic, like so bad. Sometimes the coffins and the graves aren't exactly sealed correctly, or whatever the reason over time, and that um, and the fluid doesn't just evaporate. No, it sinks down to the earth and really causes toxic things. And so this whole thing about you have to preserve the body because again, we're afraid of death. We're so afraid of it, you know.
And we're afraid of looking at it specifically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, everybody at home, if you're being like, I don't want to get embalmed, please check your local laws because this varies from state to state. Illinois, you do not have to be embalmed, but you do have to have somebody who will agree to let you be buried in their space if you aren't embalmed. And you have to find specific graveyards. I have looked into this. So like, and I kind of want to like pivot us back towards this idea of like magic and shadow work, because I think that there are some kinds of magic that have to do with death that I will not do and will not say are okay, but they mostly involve violated consent.
Oh no, no, no,
Right.
no, 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 no.
Right. So like talking to the dead is one thing.
Right. Absolutely.
Digging them up is another.
Right.
And like that, I think, especially if there are folks on the line who are new, we are not talking about the latter one. We're talking about calling your grandma, not visiting your grandma.
And it's so in a lot of pagan practices, it's important to honor your ancestors, and you don't need, for clarification, there's no need ever to dig up a grave ever to have a relationship with your ancestors, and a tangible one too, not just, well, they're in here somewhere. No, call them into your ritual space. You don't need it. I mean, granted, I think it's interesting to learn about like the Celtic headhunters who would take the skull of their enemies, enchant it. Very Nordic, right? To take the head, enchant it, and it becomes what they called a talking head. It becomes an oracle. I actually and I'm not trying to plug my book, I promise. And deeper into the underworld, I actually teach like you can get like either a ceramic skull or a resin skull or something like that, and enchant it and use it as oracle work. So kind of like think about it, instead of a crystal ball, you got a skull.
And I think that that's really powerful stuff. And I also want to like nod to the fact that there are plenty of active traditions, especially in like Afro-Caribbean stuff, where body parts are used after death. But also in my understanding of them, the people whose body parts they are agree to it ahead of time, right? That's a very different practice than what we're talking about now. And it's not one that, as far as I know, any of us have access to. So
I just want to point out that we are at 5 o'clock.
That's okay. I'm like, this is so good.
But yeah, I think that as we're talking about what magic is specifically in Norse contexts, we are talking about, and as like we're talking about like interacting with the dead in Norse contexts, there is no practice of like anything other than interacting with spirits that I would consider founded in myth or history.
So before we still have a few minutes before we close out, and you can open it up to questions and stuff and things. If someone wanted to really understand and really explore Nordic witchcraft, how would you reference someone to do that?
Where would I point them as far as like
This is where we plug our friends.
This is where we plug our friends. Well, I mean, gee, Chris, what's that group thing that you're going to be on in June?
Oh, that one. Actually, so I am actually going to be on a heathen podcast called Gifts of the Weird, and and the host John is amazing, and it was a fun chat. So I really want you to guys to tune in. I believe it'll be on June 4th is my birthday, because I just said, hey, do June 4th.
Uh,
Where else would you point someone to?
I mean, listen, I was also on Gifts of the Weird. I also had an amazing conversation with Jan. You can see my conversation about Loki with Bat Colazo on that particular thing. You can also, I think that there are episodes from, we mentioned Conla Freyason earlier.
Oh, by
And
the way, I'm going to say, if you haven't read Conla's book on Nordic Witchcraft, get it today. Get it on Kindle. It's amazing. I love it. And so good.
yeah, it's a wonderful, I think, a really fresh take on some things. And Conla's also a very good
Wait,
person.
there's no, wait. For Colin just said there's no ebook? What? No. Okay, then buy the book on Amazon. Have it sent to you. It's so good. So good. I highly recommend it.
Name of it again?
Say it again.
What is the name of the book again?
It's Nordic Witchcraft by Conla Freyason.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, it's awesome. So good.
Honestly, like, and in the last episode we did about Norse stuff, I gave the disclaimer about like having to really vet your sources on this. If you're interested in just like interacting with a good community, I would point towards the Troth. I think they're the best ones out there in American heathenry right now. They also have a bunch of really good publications, which tend more towards like history and spirit work. But there are practitioners of various kinds of magic, including Diana Paxson. All of her stuff is good. All of her stuff is not awful. These are two different things, but important things to be able to say about the same, right? Like, she's a wonderful human being. Also, she writes really good work.
Right. One of the things I will say about your witchcraft practice and things, because I was really inspired by Jan Fry's and his Seder work, which is different than the high seat work, the Seder work of the shaking and quaking, going into trance and doing a spirit journey and doing spellcraft and things, which, another shameless plug, is all going to be in my new book, Otherworld, available in the fall. But Jan Fries is a good one, and anything like that.
Jan Fries is a little bit older, but good stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it's older. One of the things that I would want to tell everyone is research heathenism, research Nordic magic, research witchcraft, and then come up with your, become inspired by other people, other talks, other authors, and just create your own thing, you know. If you need help, have questions, ask. Ask people, like, hey, how do you do the ancestors? Well, you do this. Or how would you honor Freya? Well, he would do this, and so forth. So it's okay to come up with your own way of doing things. Just because it doesn't look like mine, or look like Luke's, or look like Amy's, or whatever, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Experiment. I can't tell you how many times I've tried something. I'm like, it's not my thing. And other times I'm like, yes, this is it, you know?
I was about to say, when I, like, a quick story, because I love this story. When I first wanted to start working with Loki, the major group of people who work with Loki at the time was on Tumblr. And I saw somebody be like, well, I give him coffee every morning and he loves it. And so I gave him coffee every morning and he hated it. And it just didn't work for me. It didn't work with my relationship with him. And we had to figure something else out. And that's real and valid. And if your intuition says that, then trust it. Have your own relationship. Not everybody wants to get coffee with you. Some people want to get gin. Like,
I do.
It's so similar to something that happened with me. I had the most surreal conversation with Thor, and over Guinness beer, which I could not understand why he would want an Irish beer.
No, he loves dark beer.
Oh yeah, and it was so, because I literally I was like, I need medication. I'm having a psychotic episode, because it was so real. It was like a man was sitting across from me, picking up a beer glass and actually drinking it. It was just the most bizarre thing. But yeah, I mean, that was just what worked for me.
Right. All right, so we'll go ahead and close the recording and opening up for questions. I appreciate everyone coming. As you can tell, this is one of our favorite things to talk about. We're just going and going and going. So we'll definitely do more talks like this. One more thing. Laura Gonzalez, our fourth host who isn't here today, her and I we are airing a podcast on Monday, this Monday. I don't remember the date. So it's Memorial Day at 7 p.m. Central Time. So we will be on that if you want to check that out. And then we shall see everybody soon.